Today, we're going to talk about files restore in SharePoint and OneDrive. My name is Mark Windle. I'm a program manager on the SharePoint Online team at Microsoft. So, quick poll. How many of you folks out there have ever lost an important file that you cared about? Yeah, pretty much everybody. It's not a very fun feeling. Today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the features that we've built into our products that are going to help prevent you and your organization from ever losing files and having that terrible feeling. So let's get started. So I'll cover some of the layers of protection that we've built into these products that are going to help protect you and your files. First off is behind the scenes our geo-redundant storage layer. This is something that you can't see, but I'll cover it a little bit so you understand how we're storing the data when you're saving your file. Bubbling up into the product is version history. So if I'm collaborating on a document with somebody, they make some changes that I'd rather not have in there, I can use version history to go back in time, see the way that the document was, and revert it if I need to. Version history protects the contents of your files. The next feature we've got in the product that's going to help protect your files themselves is the recycle bin. So again, if I accidentally delete something or somebody else deletes something from my site, I can go to the recycle bin to restore that file. But what happens if I delete a lot of files? Getting into some of the newer features that we've released into the products. Mass delete notifications. So if I delete a bunch of files, mass delete notifications are going to give you a heads up, letting you know that that happened and giving you an opportunity to restore. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about files restore. That's why we're all here. That's going to help protect you and your organization from ransomware and other malicious attacks. And that provides restore capabilities for all the files in an entire library. Here's the key message that I'm hoping you'll leave here with today. That files are safer and safest in SharePoint and OneDrive. So I'm going to talk about each of these layers in detail, and then I'll have a bunch of demos at the end. All right, so let's start at the foundation. What happens when you store a file and save a file in SharePoint Online? And this is true whether you're saving the file from an Office client, sync client, or any other matter. So when a user presses save on that file to upload it, it goes into our system, and that's where it gets broken down into chunks which are individually encrypted. And from there, we put each of those chunks into Azure Blob Storage. And the key thing to note here is that when you press save, before we come back and tell you that your document has been saved, we synchronously save it to both geo-dispersed Azure regions. And within each region, there are also multiple copies of all of the pieces of your file there. So what does that mean? It means after you save your file and we tell you that it's been saved to SharePoint Online, if a server goes down, a rack of servers goes down, a whole row of servers goes down, a data center goes down, or connectivity between it goes down, your files and your data is still there. It's protected. The key takeaway here is that we've optimized our storage system for data durability. And that's the foundation upon which all of the other product features that I'm going to talk about with you today. So now talking about how things work in the product to keep your files and data safe. I'll start with version history. I briefly mentioned it. It's the thing that's going to keep the contents of your files safe, and it allows you to roll back in time to previous versions of a file. And you can see in that screenshot there, this is what it looks like in the web OneDrive view, and it's the same for a SharePoint document library as well. So you can go in there, look at all of the versions of the file that existed before, look at the contents, see what they looked like back then, and restore if need be. The key thing to note, and an important detail about how version history works, is if I revert back to a previous version, it doesn't actually lose all of the versions between now and then. It actually creates a new version of the file, setting the contents to the target restore point. So version history rolls forward. By default, when you save a file in your OneDrive, in SharePoint, or Microsoft Teams, it's saving to a library that's set to retain 500 versions. So that's going to let you go back in time a fair ways. So the next is the recycle bin. I mentioned it provides protection for files themselves. So when you delete a file in SharePoint Online, whether that's in OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, or a SharePoint document library, it goes into the recycle bin. And that's where it will stay for over 90 days. It's actually 93 days of retention. Okay, so those are some of the basics. But what happens if you accidentally delete a lot of files? We've recently released a couple of features that are going to help you detect and restore from that. The first is the mass delete prompt in the OneDrive sync client. So if I delete a bunch of files in a synced folder, the sync client's going to give me a heads up, let me know that that happened, and give me an opportunity to restore. The next is mass delete notifications from the cloud. Similar to the sync client, if I'm working online, or even if a third-party application deletes a bunch of files on my SharePoint Teams site or my OneDrive, I'll get a notification via email giving me a heads up that that happened, and again, an opportunity to restore. And when we get into the demos, I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. And the final thing to talk about here is files restore. This provides recovery from ransomware, corruption, accidental deletes. And files restore lets you roll back all of the files in a library to any point in time in the past 30 days. We released files restore for OneDrive early last year, and I'm pleased to say that it's now available for files stored in SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. Okay, so let's get right into some demos where I'll spend most of my time and show you folks what this stuff looks like. All right, so we're looking at Windows Explorer. This is a synced folder, and it's actually on my OneDrive. Oh, let me escape that. Thanks for the heads up. See it? Excellent. Okay. Now we're looking at a synced folder in Windows Explorer. And so this is my OneDrive that I'm syncing. And the selected folder, it's probably hard to see out there, but the selected folder has a lot of items in it. That's the short version here. And when I'm going to accidentally hit the delete key. Okay. So what happened here, and it looks like I've got notifications snoozed, but usually you'll get a toast from Windows. What happened here is that the sync client detected that a mass delete event happened on my device. And it's asking me, do I want to actually delete those files? Do I want to push those deletes to the cloud and have them go there? And if that was intentional, I can hit remove, and those files will delete from the cloud as you'd expect from the sync client. But in this case, it was accidental. So I'm going to hit restore files. And what that's going to do, it's going to prevent those deletes from propagating to the cloud. and it's going to immediately bring the files back onto my client device. So here we go. If I was accidentally deleted a bunch of files, you can see the mass delete prompt helped me detect that, and it brought my files back safe and sound. I showed it to you on OneDrive, but it operates the same way on a team site as well when you're syncing a team site document library. Now, let's take a look at what mass delete notifications in the cloud looks like. So similar to the sync experience, here I've got the operations team site open. I'm looking at the document library, and again, I've got a folder there with a lot of stuff in it. So I'm going to delete that. Hit confirm. And that's going to move that folder and all the stuff within it into the recycle bin that I talked about earlier. Now, in the back end, we're going to detect that a mass delete event has occurred and send a notification via email to me, giving me a heads up that that happened. It usually takes about 15 minutes, so I'm going to show you one that I got earlier. You can see here, this is what the message looks like, giving me a heads up that it happened. A bunch of files were deleted, letting me know how long they're going to be retained for, and giving me a quick link to the recycle bin where I can go recover them. Now, if this was intentional, I can safely ignore this mail. But in this case, it was accidental. So I'm going to click on that call to action link to go to the recycle bin. And there we can see the folder that I deleted. I hit restore. It pulls it back. And I've recovered from a mass accidental delete in the cloud. Okay, now let's talk about something a little more complicated. What happens if I get hit by ransomware on this machine? I know that's a big fear for many of you, and it is for me as well. So here, we're back on my client machine. Again, this is my OneDrive folder. And what I'm going to do here is simulate a ransomware attack on this machine. I've got Windows Defender installed and running with real-time protection. And now, with integration between Windows Defender and the OneDrive Sync client, I have end-to-end protection if I get hit by ransomware. Let's take a look at what that looks like here. So in this folder, I'm going to simulate a ransomware attack. Yeah, confirm that. Don't do this at home, folks. Okay. My notifications are snooze, but you can see a couple things happened there. I immediately got a toast from Windows Defender letting me know that ransomware was detected. And you can see all of the files in my OneDrive synced folder have been encrypted and renamed to .wannacry. What's happening right now in the background is that Defender is working to remediate the threat. So it's locating the executable that caused the problem and more or less cleaning my machine. And now with integration between Windows Defender and the OneDrive client, it's also able to detect that files on the synced path have been affected by this ransomware. So after it's done the remediation, it's going to send a message to the sync client. And you can see I just received that toast, letting it know that some of its files have been affected. And the sync client pops a toast notification saying, do you want to restore your files? In case I missed that, all that can happen pretty quickly. There's a warning in the taskbar here. Opening that up, it says signs of ransomware have been detected. And there's an easy one-click restore link there that can take me to the restore point. So clicking on that opens up the files restore experience on my OneDrive. The cool thing about this is that it's preloaded with a suggested restore point. That date and time actually comes from Windows Defender on my client machine, and it is the last known good state on my machine. So when I restore to that, yeah. So restoring to that point is going to bring all my files back to before the point where ransomware affected it. It usually takes a minute to run. There it is.
Is that functionality disabled or somewhat hindered if you're using a third-party security software, or something else, with the security center?
It's available when real-time protection's enabled with Windows Defender. Yeah, files restore on the web is available no matter what antivirus you're using. So the job ran, and you can see all of my files have been restored. So in the sync client there, I can say my files are okay, let it know that a restore happened, and we just recovered from ransomware. How cool is that? So that was files restore with Windows Defender integration on my OneDrive. Let's go take a look at how that works with files stored in SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. So I've opened up the Teams desktop client here, where I do a lot of my work these days. And I can see I've got a message from Nestor this morning asking for help. All of the files in the document library that we've been working on have been affected by ransomware as well. And you can see, just like on my local folder, these files and Teams have been impacted by ransomware. So I can click on the Open in SharePoint link, go to the web experience for this SharePoint team site, see those documents there. And now that we have files restore available for SharePoint document libraries, when I go to the settings here, there's a new link to restore this library. Clicking on that takes us to the familiar files restore page. Here are the activities that happened this morning from the ransomware on behalf of Patty. I can select those, hit restore, and just like on my OneDrive, I'm rolling back the changes made by the ransomware on the files stored in Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. So that takes a minute, as we just saw. I'm going to go back and tell my colleague Nestor that it's going to be fixed in a minute. Oh, and you can see these are starting to come back now. There you go. Recovery from ransomware. All right, just go back to the slides quickly. I know I'm short on time. We'll wrap things up. So the key point that I want you to leave here with today is that files are safest in SharePoint and OneDrive. We talked about the layers of protection. Here's a call to action. Put your files in SharePoint and OneDrive. Here's some resources that are going to help you do that. Migrate to SharePoint Online. There's a quick link for that. If anybody has any questions or wants to talk to me a little bit more detail about this stuff, I'll be heading to the migration booth in the expo hall right after this. We can talk about migration and files restore or anything else I covered today. And some more resources to get your files and content into SharePoint and OneDrive. Set up sync with OneDrive to get those mass delete prompts and the protection with Defender integration and to get your files into the cloud. And make sure you have all the documents in your organization by syncing your desktop folders, pictures, and documents. Lastly, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody coming out. I know you're all busy. I'm glad you came. Hope it was useful. Thanks.